Hello, I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. Today's guest, Jim Willie of the GoldenJackass.com website. He's also the editor of the Hat Trick Letter. Jim Willie, thank you for joining us here today on USAWatchdog.com.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be on. I think this is the first.
Well, it is the first, and a lot of people have been asking you, and a lot of people don't know this about you, but I want to put this out there. You have a Ph.D. from Carnegie Mellon University in statistics, and you also have been producing this Hat Trick Letter for a number of years. I've been following you at least since 2006. You've made a lot of predictions. Back in 2006, I thought, wow, is this guy crazy? And now I say, wow, this guy's crazy like a fox, because I don't know if every single prediction you made has come true, but boy, the big ones I read have come true. That you said that we'd have QE to infinity. You said that the housing market would turn into a rental market. I'm just naming a couple of ones that come off the top of my head. You've had a lot of big predictions that have come true. And your most recent article is the Immutable Laws of Gold. I want to talk to you about gold today. Can we do that?
Sure.
Off camera, you were talking about this, and I have to credit this squarely with you. You should use it in one of your next pieces. And I said a lot of people think that gold is in a bubble, and you went, gold. It's the anti-bubble. How can money be in a bubble? Can you explain the anti-bubble of gold?
Well, take a look at just the most recent years, not going back a generation, but going back, say, a decade or more. There was a big asset bubble in tech, telecom, and the stock market in 1999 and 2000. That all broke, and the reaction was, it was almost desperation by Greenspan at the time. I remember like it was yesterday. It was late January of 01, and he was desperate to bring down the long-term interest rate on Treasury bonds, and he was frustrated that mortgage rates wouldn't come down. What they were trying to do was build and construct a housing bubble to prevent a collapse of the economy. And he actually encouraged people to borrow money against their homes. He actually went out and said, this is Greenspan, that the risk is offloaded in a very professional and sophisticated manner. And all I could think of was, what a bunch of rot, what a bunch of horsepucky. So what they've done is they did a series of bubbles, and when the housing and mortgage bubble broke, what they thought was, well, we've got to have a bubble, we've got to have a rally in Treasury bonds. And they couldn't get it. It started to go over 4%. I believe this was early in 2010. And they tried to come up with this story. Well, there's a flight to safety that's going into Treasury bonds. Treasuries and the dollar are the sanctuary of last resort. Well, no, they weren't. What they did was they put on through Morgan Stanley $8 trillion worth of interest rate swap contracts that created artificial demand for long-term Treasury bonds that made it look like there was a flight to safety. And once the flight to safety was starting in an artificial way, they said, well, look, here's proof. Bond yields are coming down. Looks like the whole world is flocking into treasuries. No, the last bubble, because it kills capital. If you've got businesses that say, no, we're not going to invest in expanding and hiring, instead we're just going to buy some safe securities like treasury bonds, and the banks, instead of saying, well, we're going to issue loans to the commercial sector, no, let's instead do the treasury bond carry trade. What you've got is a giant suction of capital. The treasury bonds are the last bubble, and the response to it is the anti-bubble in gold. Gold is not a bubble. It's a response to the biggest bubble in the history of modern world, which is the treasury bonds. And by the way, I do make mistakes. I'm very happy that most of my mega forecasts, as I call them, have come correct. I don't like seeing the housing market destroyed and the mortgage bond market destroyed and full of fraud, but I forecasted it. I don't like seeing the banks gone insolvent, but I forecasted it. I don't like seeing the U.S. economy impossible for recovery because of lack of traction from lack of critical mass in industry, but it has happened. I don't like seeing that the U.S. government deficits are chronically over 1 trillion as I forecasted, but it's happened. They're all disasters. They're mega forecasts. But if you want to find my area of weakness, just go back to, say, 2008, 2009, where I forecasted big rises in the long-term Treasury yields. But Rob Kirby is a friend of mine and a colleague, and some people call him crazy too, but that's fine. I regard that as a compliment because the people making the criticism are usually ignorant as four-legged dogs.
Mm.
That's my response, Greg.
Well, you have called a lot of big calls, and as I said, nobody is you're not omnipotent, but you made some huge calls. You also said this about the banking industry that we need to take these guys into receivership. We need to liquidate the debts, and this is the reason why. And I believe this down to my soul. This is why the economy is never going to get better as long as we have these big banks and we refuse to liquidate them and have real accounting and the like. But let's go back to your immutable laws of gold, which is part of the reason why gold's going up is because they keep propping up the banks. They keep printing this money. We're nowhere near the end of the gold run, are we? I mean, people keep saying this. Well, they can keep manipulating the gold and silver markets, and you say we can't. And I ask you, can they keep manipulating the gold and silver markets with these naked shorts forever?
Well, no, because they're running out of gold in their banks, and once they run out of gold in their banks, there won't be any gold in the markets where they control the gold price through naked shorts. My joke, it's a forecast. My joke is, well, we're going to get a big run-up in gold when COMEX shuts down from no supply. And, if you want to, apart from that climax where there's no gold in the market, what's the price of apples in a supermarket, a big, big market that has no apples? What's the price?
Pretty expensive.
There's no such concept. There's no price where there's no supply.
Oh, right.
You need supply to create a price because the price is the balancing act of supply against demand. No supply, there is no price. But apart from all that about absent supply in the market, this gold market will continue forever until the breakdown because they're not attempting any solutions. All they're doing is preserving the power. And you mentioned the big banks. They have two characteristics. They're insolvent because they wrecked themselves with the housing and mortgage market. They were huge holders of mortgages. They're still trying to cover up it all. In fact, QE3 is to buy up a lot of mortgage bonds so that they can get rid of the $1 trillion fraud. It's not going to be 50 or 40 billion a month. It's going to be 80 to 100 billion a month, and they're going to keep doing it until they bury all the fraud. But the other characteristic beside insolvency of the big banks is that they're crime centers. The controlling agents for the U.S. and British government and probably many European governments, but I like to focus on the Anglo world, U.S. and London, the controlling centers are the big banks. That is precisely what the fascist business model is all about. That's precisely what happened after the coup d'etat known as 9/11. So, Greg, it's going to go on forever, but forever is a concept without meaning in the real world. It's going to go until it breaks down from lack of supply in the gold market and from a rejection of the dollar globally. Why will they reject the dollar? Well, because no one's buying the treasury bonds and nobody is stopping the U.S. government debts. So the debasement from the QE and bond purchases from the Fed continues, and the foreigners are going to say, we don't want your dollars, and if you want to use them, we're going to impose a 10% or a 20% tax to convert it. And there will be your forced devaluation that starts this thing down the hill. So, Greg, it's complicated. It's complicated. It can't go on forever. That's like saying, man will live forever. No, I don't know about that.
What about the recent article, recent story just this week that Bloomberg and the way they position this is really is golden. They said there's going to be a tight supply of treasuries because the Fed is buying 90% of them. Did you see that on Bloomberg? That's the way they spun it. They spun it that, there's going to be a tight supply of treasuries because the Fed is buying them. Not that, oh, my God, they're buying 90% of our debt, but there's going to be a tight supply of treasuries. What do you make of them buying the recent announcement, stories breaking on Bloomberg, that they're buying 90% of the nation's debt, the Federal Reserve?
Well, two things. First, that's up from 80%, which is what it was in 2011. And second, it means that no one wants them. If no one wants an object, then what's its value? Not much. But with the Treasury bond bubble, you've got an elevated price. Near zero bond yield means elevated bubble price. So you've got a bubble price that no one wants. Well, who's supporting the price? It's interest rate swap derivative contracts. Trillions and trillions and trillions of them. I mean, gosh, you need to really stack $100 bills on pallets and then put football fields worth of pallets to comprehend what $1 trillion is. It's like 10 square blocks that's 10 blocks high filled with $100 bills. That's what $1 trillion is. I mean, these are mind-boggling concepts. What I described might have been the U.S. government debt of $16 trillion, but $1 trillion is a few blocks, cube of $100 bills in pallets. Now, this is going to end very badly, and I think they're inviting a breakdown because they have no solutions, and they're just praying that they can keep this thing going on forever. But you can make your analogies. 2 or 3 years ago, they were trying to juggle 5 balls. Well, now they're juggling 8 to 10 balls. You could say a different analogy. Before, they had 6 or 8 holes in a dike, and they were getting all the bankers to stick their fingers in the dike. Well, now there are 80 holes, and they're running out of banker fingers. This thing is going to end badly because they're going to run out of gold and supply, and the foreigners are going to reject the dollar. Greg, it's that simple. Supply of gold is lacking, and demand for treasury bonds and dollars is evaporating. It's that simple, Greg.
You're not the only person that's talking about collapse. Ann Barnhart, the former broker dealer, commodities dealer, who had her own commodities business, shut it down after MS Global. She thinks we're headed for a collapse. Other people, John Williams says that we're going to have hyperinflation. That nothing spells collapse like hyperinflation by 2014. My question to you is, what's the timing of the collapse?
Okay, I'll be very honest. I don't know. I thought back in 2005 that it would be a miracle if we got to 2010 without a collapse. I also thought that we'd have, gold price up near $3,000 or $5,000 by 2010. I'm amazed constantly at the ability of the corrupt system with the criminal bankers in charge of putting on more patches, more planks, more cables, and hiding more fraud and more corruption in order to buy another year. It's called the Rubin Doctrine for Robert Rubin. But to give you a more specific answer that doesn't dodge the question, I don't like saying I don't know, but what I do know is that there are many, many triggers that could bring about the collapse. And I kind of disagree with John Williams. I have a lot of respect for his work, but one thing I pay less attention to with Williams' work at the Shadow Government Statistics are his forecasts. He's an expert in economic statistics of a legitimate type with integrity. But he's been calling for hyperinflation for 4 years. Hyperinflation does not mean systemic breakdown. It means rising prices. It doesn't mean systemic breakdown. I'm talking about systemic breakdown, but let's just talk quickly about some triggers. If foreigners suddenly reject the dollar and say, look, I know you want to buy some crude oil. I know you want to buy some Chinese and Japanese electronics for Apple and whatever, stereo units. I know you want to buy these cars, and I know you want to buy this French wine, but we're not going to take your dollars anymore because of what your central bank is doing and what your government is doing. You're printing money, and you're covering uncontrollable government debts. We don't want your dollars anymore. If they impose a 20% tax for conversion or a 10% tax for conversion of dollars, that's an instant devaluation and an instant inflation of roughly the same. It's not exact because the United States does produce some of its own products for demand. But if they impose a 10 or 20% tax for converting dollars abroad, that's going to result in a 5 to 10% sudden shockwave of inflation in the United States. That's very disruptive. On the other hand, another trigger is big bank failures. I'm told by my best sources that there's going to be some small bank failure. And because of corresponding bank obligations, a bigger bank is going to fall when the smaller bank dies. If you get then a domino effect that runs through London and New York, it might start in France, for instance, with, who knows, one of their big three banks, Paribas or Crédit Agricole or what's their third one? Société Générale. Okay, big bank failures and a string of them, if it catches like a wave, that could cause a systemic failure. Suddenly, credit cards don't work, supply chains aren't filled, and you get what I call a systemic breakdown. Another potential trigger is just really gross economic stagnation. And I believe this is going to be a hard thing to hear, but I believe Obamacare is not intended so much to provide health care for the poor of the United States. It's intended to wreck small business. The objective, I believe, of the Obama administration is to wreck the government, to wreck the economy, to wreck the currency, and to finish it off. Obamacare has resulted in a wave of job cuts, primarily to people who are on the edge economically and who voted for Obama. Okay, another potential trigger is a very sudden impact. China is working on a number of different bilateral trade, they call them currency swaps, bilateral currency swap. You recognize the yuan in Brazil, say, or in Japan. That's the biggest one recently. Yeah. Imagine China and Japan with a currency swap, non-dollar trade settlement. Ooh! All right, between China and Iran, between China and Russia, that's another huge one from, I think, September. Okay, wow, that's non-dollar. And China said, we will allow oil purchases from Russia to settle in Chinese yuan. If that's not a direct assault on the petrodollar, I don't know what is. So you all these different trade settlement issues. And China's working on something. It's going to be a non-dollar trade settlement system. They're working on it now. It's ready. It's waiting for a greater crisis in the West. So these are all triggers. There are reports that King Abdullah did not come out of his back surgery about 3 weeks ago. And this comes just a month or two after their security chief, Prince Bandar, who's got an ugly nickname of Bandar Bush because he's such a good friend of the Bush family. Prince Bandar was killed. He was assassinated in September by Hezbollah. It's been kept very quiet because announcing it publicly might bring instability to the Saudi regime. Well, now apparently King Abdullah has not responded well to back surgery, and some reports, I'm not saying it's true, some reports are saying that he's having shutdown of his various organs. So he might be brain dead soon. I'm not saying he is, but he might be. This is a risk. If the Saudi regime just cannot show stability, that is the core of the petrodollar. That's a key element to the pillar called the dollar-based system. So I've identified a number of different threats to the U.S. dollar system. If any of these happens, then we're going to get some severe disruption that's going to make this hurricane, this so-called natural Hurricane Sandy, it's going to make the damage look really, really big compared to any hurricane in New York and New Jersey. So, Greg, I don't have a direct answer. I mean, I don't know when it's going to be. When I joke with some people, I say, well, it's going to be August 45th of next year. I don't know. August 45 sounds good, though.
Well, I'll tell you what. You have called for this. You're talking about this. People like Jim Rickards have talked about this. I've been saying this for a couple of years, that they're not going to want to do it. They're not going to want to go to a gold standard or some gold component in the U.S. dollar. but they're going to. They're going to be forced into it, and I think that's what you think. Tell me how your premise is that we're gonna have a gold standard. We're going to get gold back into the monetary system. Why and when?
Well, it's going to return because it has to. There's a joke in Europe and in England that the American, it's a bad joke, but it's very true, and it's an insult to the American mindset. It said the American leaders will try every wrong solution, but eventually they'll try the right solution. And that really speaks to the American leadership nonsense regarding the banks, maybe the military too, but government and the banks. They're going to try everything possible to preserve the system. Look what's happening in Europe. They did this, I just call it the Stability Fund. It's got a 4-letter acronym, but Draghi has a Stability Fund. I call it his stillborn baby because it was his first act and deed, and it resulted within 1 month of a panic in Spanish and Italian government bonds because the Euro Central Bank lifted the value, reduced the bond yields, in Italy and Spain, and then he released this fund where they could tap the fund, where they went out and bought the overpriced Spanish and Italian bonds, and within a month they had a problem of even worse insolvency. Okay, there's an insult that just happened. One of the major credit rating agencies just downgraded the Stability Fund bonds from the Euro Central Bank. I mean, what the hell's going on? Their solutions are getting downgraded by the increasingly responsible U.S. debt rating agencies. The gold standard will return because gold will be the asset that is left standing. I think almost everything in paper is going to just go to hell. I mean, since when do sovereign bonds with AAA ratings go into deep decline? Remember, the Greek bonds had AAA rating. The Italian bonds had AAA rating. The Spanish bonds had AAA rating. The French bonds don't deserve their AAA rating, and neither do the U.S. Treasuries. You cannot have unlimited bond purchases from a central bank and justify a AAA rating for the Treasury bonds. So gold is going to be the last asset standing, and a gold standard will return because it will be the only viable solution. After all other attempts failed badly, and we're seeing all the other attempts fail badly. If there was QE1 and it was successful, why was there QE2? If QE2 was successful, why was there Operation Twist? If Operation Twist was successful, why is there QE3? It will not be successful, and they're going to have a QE4. But what we've got instead is QE to infinity and global QE. We've got direct statements from the Fed that they're going to keep 0% almost permanently. Every several months, they extend it to another year. What is it, the end of 2015? We're going to have 0%?
Yes.
This is a joke. It's an absolute joke. You cannot have promises of unlimited bond purchases and maintain viability of the system. Notice that all purchase programs for the bonds must be repeated. This is my forecast from 2010. I said, we're going to have QE. Okay, you wait. It'll be QE. And once we got to QE, I said, and there will be a QE2 and a QE3 because it will not fix anything. Notice all the bond patches that failed in Europe. The Stability Fund slapped with a downgrade. Now, we got a climax bust coming for bonds, currencies, and the banking system. They're all interrelated. It'll dictate a radical solution, but the solution will not come by the U.S., London, and Western European bankers who run the politicians. They're in control of the politicians. They have been for a long time. They run these elections. They're absolute travesties. The core problem is contaminated money. That's what most people are starting to realize. Okay, you've got a solution coming in Europe, but isn't it just more debt? Okay, you've got these more bonds, but isn't it just a higher, more sophisticated subordination? That this bond is higher ranked than that bond, and that bond is lower ranked? I mean, gosh, think of a blood system where you've got contaminated blood. It's killing the organs. That's what's happening with this monetary system. We need a new blood system. It most likely arrives in the form of an alternative trade system. And I'm told that the Chinese trade system that they're working on is going to be decentralized, which means, okay, notice right now all the different payments, they go through a bank. And the what do you call it? The SWIFT bank system.
That's right.
It's a coded system among banks, and its organization head is in Brussels, Belgium, which is the seat of the ECB, European Union. Okay, so if you do not have a requirement that all trade settlement go through the banks, if you do not use just the dollar. My gosh, the Federal Reserve is the focal point for all global trade because all of it is settled in dollars, and all dollars are going through the SWIFT system from bank to bank, and all that goes through the Federal Reserve to approve of. If it's going to be decentralized, and my big source, who's part of the design of the solution, he's on the edge, on a certain key part. He said, Jim, my team is involved in the replacement to the petrodollar itself. Okay, well, that sounds pretty important. He was one of the only guys who was not the only white man who attended an Easter 2010 conference with over 200 billionaires in the Arab world. Took place in Abu Dhabi. They're talking about replacing the gold petrodollar, replacing the standard. In order to do that, they needed a military commitment to protect the Persian Gulf, and they got it from Russia and China. Oh boy. Nations are participating. We'll see a stable recovery. These are consequences of the crisis hits and a solution comes, a new trade settlement comes. It's going to be decentralized, which means it's going to be, like on a BlackBerry.
So, Jim, when you say decentralized, that means what?
Well, simply stated, it means that all the trade payments do not go through the banking system, which goes through the Federal Reserve as the the choke point, if you will, the final focal point. Imagine, for instance, someone on a port who goes onto his BlackBerry and says, "Okay, payment received." Message goes to the buyer, or other way around. The buyer says, "Okay, payment is off. Please confirm when received." It's going to be point to point rather than bank to bank. And it's not going to be dollar focused, therefore it will not go just through banks. It could be like a barter system. My example that I like to produce is Bolivia might make a commitment for a huge amount of copper, tin, and aluminum. And China makes a commitment for that and says, okay, we will give you credits for electronics and car parts and a lot of other things. So Bolivia and China have their deal, and no U.S. bank is involved. It's just a barter deal. And it's going to be gold backed because they can't do this without some sort of short-term credit. And I'm told that it's going to be gold backed. There are going to be some notes involved. Just short-term, just think of a trade note. I don't have the details, but there's going to be some short-term trade notes. And what they're going to do is satisfy the need of letters of credit. So you have decentralized letters of credit, gold-backed, not going through banks. Think of big, big barter systems. China and Bolivia for industrial metal and domestic electronic goods. Okay, so that's how the decentralization works. But when the solution comes, the nations that participate in it will see a stable recovery, while the rest of the world is going to just grope and degrade. The nations not participating, they're going to suffer from a currency decline because no one's going to want their currency. In order for them to get the trade goods, they're going to have to use their unwanted currency to bid up what is wanted. And what is wanted will be a gold-backed currency. And my guess is going to be the Chinese yuan. It's got to go through some steps, Greg, but they're talking about convertibility now, where you can convert a yuan for a British pound, Swiss franc, Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, whatever, South African rand. They've got to have it convertible. Once it's convertible, the gigantic accumulation of gold that's going on in China will be an enabling agent for it to be gold-backed. And what I think is going to happen is it's going to be like an intermediary step. They're not going to say the yuan is gold-backed, but what they're going to say is you can interchangeably use the trade notes, which are gold-backed, or the Chinese yuan. One or the other, will honor both, and eventually people are going to realize they're the same thing, or close to the same thing, or redeemable and fungible in some way. People need to be aware that nations that don't participate in the next solution that has a gold core are going to be thrust into the third world.
What does that do to the price of gold?
Well, what I'm hearing regarding this trade-based system that's going to have a gold core is that agreements have been made that the price will be anywhere between $6,000 and $8,000 per ounce of gold. They can't do it. They cannot say, well, the current price of gold will be fine, or let's round it to 2,000. No, there's too much corruption behind the current price of gold. There's too much allocated gold in official accounts in London and New York that are gone. There's too much naked shorting that provides the supply. Oh gosh, what was it? One of the first days of November, the entire global mining output for silver was sold in 1 hour with naked shorting. You can't do this. You can't honor that price. The participants who are designing this system have come up with some round figures of about 7,000 for the price of gold that will be involved as the core of the new system.
And silver?
Well, I don't know exactly, but what they do is they say 7,000, but the gold-silver ratio will return to its normal 20 to 25. If it's 20, that's $350 silver. If it's 25, it's a little bit less. Just think a minimum of $250 silver and a minimum of $200 silver and a minimum of 5,000 gold. Those are just round numbers that will be very much present in the next system. And it will also enable some of the banks that do own gold to say, we are suddenly solvent because we've got reserves in gold, and now they're worth, 5 times as much.
What will a gold-backed currency in America look like then if we go to a gold standard? What will it look like here in America?
It won't exist. It won't exist. The United States will refuse.
But
it will not be
accepted. Eventually, if everybody else is doing it, won't we have to use our 8,000
No,
tons?
I don't think so. I think what they're going to do is, I'm steadfast on this. If you've seen all the patchwork and criminal deeds without a solution up to now, then expect a trade zone to be of Western Europe, England, and North America that honors the dollar in its final chapter. And it'll be downgraded and devalued beyond belief. Look for a fork in the road where foreign dollar-based accounts, and the examples I like to give are Panama. You've got a bank account. Suppose someone has a bank account in Panama. It's dollar-based. Or a bank account in Switzerland. It's dollar-based. Or a bank account in Hong Kong, and it's dollar-based. They will all be honored. They will not be devalued. They will be honored, and there might be some kind of a request that says, okay, we suggest you move your $50,000 in the dollar account. We suggest you move it to one of these other currencies whose accounts we will offer for you in this same account.
Oh.
So move it to euros or move it to British. But inside the United States, there'll be this steadfast, last-ditch, urgent need to defend the dollar. Show your national pride. Don't divest of your dollars. Don't buy gold. Show that you're a patriot. They might integrate it into new laws where you're going to lose government contracts or lose university funding for research grants if you abandon the dollar or you advise your clients or your staff or whatever to go away from the dollar. No. And in the process, Greg, what's going to happen is the dollar is going to be devalued by at least 50% inside the United States. They're going to discourage people from buying gold, and then they're going to devaluate the currency for savings and at the same time confiscate the pension funds and force them into treasury bonds. Nasty things.
America is going to start getting the bill for all this money printing, is what you're saying, in terms of higher prices.
Higher prices from the lowered currency, and it's going to be a last ditch to preserve the dollar. Don't let the dollar die. It's going to be like a national slogan. Hang on to the dollar. Show your patriotism. Wave your flag. use the dollar. Oh my gosh. So those who follow that will become debt slaves, homeless, jobless, poverty-stricken, and their next residence could very likely be the Fema camps.
My theory on the Fema camps, and we're going to wrap this up pretty soon. Tell me if I'm not right. People say, how are they going to get people to go? I think that what they're going to tell people is, oh, you don't have any power? Oh, you don't have any food? You don't have any hot water? We have this camp over here. Why don't you just come to a FEMA camp? And that's going to look pretty good to people who are in the cold. What do you think?
I think that's probably very accurate. I like to do something with my more controversial topics. I like to mention them and then move on. Okay, there are a lot of theories regarding the FEMA camps. I'll just mention a couple things. In October, they officially went active. Another thing regarding the FEMA camps, I have 3 clients who visited FEMA camps. They do exist. Another thing is the contract for operating them requires payments only if they're 70% occupied. So there are a lot of homeless. If the economy deteriorates further, if the dollar devalues further and is isolated by the rest of the global players, the United States is going to have a whole lot more homeless. If jobs don't pick up, if the dollar gets devaluated further, if the bank's insolvency becomes more recognized, if the credit engines start to just sputter unbelievably, let's face it, if the Mississippi River causes more and more problems for the supply chain, the United States supplies through the Mississippi River 1/3 of all the grain to the entire world. Okay, if you've got more homeless in the United States and more dispossessed and more out of work and things degrade in the U.S. economy, this 0% interest rate plus the quantitative easing, 0% plus the bond buying, it guarantees further deterioration of the economy. This is an enormous blind spot for U.S. economies. They're on orders never to discuss this. But if you get the further deterioration and the more homeless and they start rioting and there's disorder, then you're going to see the FEMA camps fill up. Because what are you going to do if they just arrested 500 people in this city, 500 people in that city, and 1,000 in this city for rioting and mayhem and looting? What are you going to do with these people? The United States is already the #1 world industrialized nation. I'm sorry. The United States is has the largest criminal population, prison population in the world. If you get rioters dispossessed who are attacking supermarkets for food and gas stations for gasoline, my gosh, I just suspect that the prisons that are already at limits, they're going to defer to the FEMA camps. All right, I don't want to discuss the FEMA camps anymore.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what? We're gonna leave it at that. I know that maybe someday, if your internet connection, you can support a Skype video. We've had some breaks in the interview, but I'm going to edit those out. People won't hear those. But it was really good having you on audio. For audio, we'll have you on again. A lot of people have been requesting you, Jim Willie, and really appreciate you being on USAWatchdog.com.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Greg, and maybe next time we can talk about how the zero interest rate plus the bond purchases from the Fed guarantee a systemic failure and guarantee a U.S. government default. And I hope people go to my Golden Jackass website and sign up for the hat trick letter.
Thank you, Jim Willie. Really appreciate having you on.
Okay, my pleasure.